Hello everyone and welcome back to Timberborn! This is episode 6 of the Haunted Hollows series. In the last episode we got our two boys up and running. As you can see, the beavers are utilizing this immediately. It is quite useful for getting across from our lower section up to the production facilities. And then we have a third one that is in the works. We unfortunately are out of metal blocks at the moment, and that is due to the fact that the smelter right here is powered by bad water. But since we're in a drought right now, we don't have any bad water flowing. My goal during the next wet season is to get a couple smelters up here, and then also construct another engine or two, which should help stabilize our metal block production, since we're going to be using a lot of metal blocks coming up here shortly. We also added a lot of water pumpers in the last episode, since we were running a bit short on water during the last drought, and pretty soon we're going to be facing the challenge of storing enough water. So we're going to hopefully be upgrading some of these water storages to large water tanks, but those are one of the many buildings that do require metal blocks. And with it being cycle 6, we have the drought that is going on. We have 5.7 days left. Based on what you guys were saying in the comments and what I've experienced, I assume that the next event that occurs is going to be a bad tide, since 7 cycles without a bad tide seems like that is quite a stretch. But we do have some irrigation barriers that we have placed along over here, and then also down below, in order to help protect some of our crops. But we're also working on getting a bad water diversion system set up. We have a bunch of levees that are placed along here, and if we end up getting this whole system up and running before the bad tide occurs, then we won't really need any of these irrigation barriers, but that would be a good problem to have. And then I saw one of the channel members mention that they utilize this whole area for a reservoir, which I hadn't really even thought of before. I just assumed we'd make some sort of food harvesting over here. But that would not be a bad idea in terms of where we could get some more water storage, especially as our beaver population continues to grow. At the moment we have 84 occupied beds, and then we have 18 that are unoccupied. We're doing pretty good in terms of the workers and vacancies. We only have 1 vacant job, although we do have 9 of these water pumpers paused. In fact, we actually have 10 of them paused. So that's nearly a dozen jobs during the wet season that we would need to turn on. And we do have a good amount of breeding pods that are up and running. So ideally we would just increase the amount of beavers by getting their well-being up, since they're currently only at 10. But we do have the option to add breeding pods, since they're relatively inexpensive. So we'll keep an eye on how many unoccupied beds we have throughout this drought, and then also the next wet season. And then in terms of our food situation, we have about 830 food at the moment. So we're not really going up or down, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but ideally we do want to be storing more food. And we have a good chunk of the food is actually berries, which we don't really want that to be the food that they're consuming, since it doesn't give them any benefits other than satisfy hunger. Which means that one of the food buildings that I am considering unlocking is the hydroponic garden, since the footprint is so small and it really only requires water in order for it to run. But that means that we would be very dependent on having enough water for us to get food, and that's also going to stem from how much water we can end up storing during a drought. We started around 2.4 or 2.5 thousand. We're down to 1.7 thousand at the moment, and so by end of the drought we will see how much water we have left over. If we have a large excess of water, then we can consider getting a hydroponic garden started, but I think we'd probably want to get the smelters up and running first. And then technically we could actually rearrange this just a little bit. As long as we had one levee right here, then we can low prioritize these ones, and then if they finish these ones first and get this one placed in, it will make this whole area watertight, since the water, or bad water I should say, won't be able to go around here, and then the beavers can finish this as they can. But it wouldn't be the worst thing if they didn't finish this before the bad tide comes through. Really, we just want to get this front part finished plus this one levee back here. And then we have the sluices that are up and running. I have them set to open, since if this part isn't finished, we don't want the bad water to go up through here and then spill out over into our colony. So this is just a safety precaution at the moment. And then in the meantime we can get some more storages set up, since we're actually maxed out on planks at the moment, and we're also maxed out on treated planks. And then we can also start thinking about how we want to have the production line set up here. We are fortunate that we have a little shelf that runs along here, and this would be perfect for getting some overhangs established, since this would increase the usable space by quite a bit. But then we also have the option of getting a large water wheel set up. I think that this is just one level too high, so we would need to lower some of these, but it would work pretty darn well, I think. But before we get to the point where we need to decide if we want to have water wheels or overhangs going across, we'll be able to get a few buildings set up over here. I think one slightly tricky thing we'll have to figure out is how we want to connect everything without having the paths cut across our power lines. I think at the very least we can start by getting one smelter and one engine constructed up here. They obviously won't be able to finish building the engine since it requires metal blocks, but they should be able to construct a smelter. And then we also don't necessarily need the path to go all the way over here. It may be helpful to have it there, at least temporarily, but we can rearrange it as needed. We also have these tube stations and tubeways to consider, because we could always put some tubes going around the backside, using some overhangs to get them over here, and then maybe set up a tubeway or a tube station right in this area. And then we'll have a perfect little 3x3 area here for another engine. You would probably either need to make an overhang extend along the back, or we could wait until we get some dirt blocks and then just place a couple right here. And then I do want to utilize the vertical power shafts, since those serve as basically a platform and then also a power shaft. And then we can use that in conjunction with dynamite / tunneling, and that'll help us go underground basically, or just one level below, and then transfer the power underneath the paths. But in order to do that, we have to go ahead and get the deep bad water pump unlocked. It's only 250 science, and we have plenty of science right now, 3,000 at the moment, but it requires metal blocks. And so once again, the smelter is going to be very essential moving forward. And so we're actually going to do this. We'll pause this smelter. I might end up replacing this one with an explosives factory, and then we'll have this one engine power these two smelters, since the power ratio is perfect. 400 HP from an engine, and then both these smelters require 200. And then let's lower this to the lowest priority. We don't need to worry about them putting stuff into here. This helps basically store some of our extra gear since we were maxed out, so we don't need to worry about demolishing this. We can just leave it as is, since we will be constructing this engine at some point. And then like I mentioned, big picture, we are going to connect all of these systems into one, but for now it's trying to manage how do you want to have these independent systems set up initially, and then be able to connect them down the road. And we only have 0.4 days left in the drought. It looks like we have been going pretty hard on planks. We're almost maxed out once again. Gears we're doing pretty good. Scrap metal we're also almost maxed out on. And it seems like we have a good amount of water, which is excellent news. Made it throughout the drought with over 800 water, which is fantastic. We are increasing our population a little bit. We only have 15 free beds instead of 18. And so let's start turning on these water pumpers. And oh my goodness, we have so many vacant jobs. 12 at the moment. So we gotta do a little bit of rearranging. I think this is one of the jobs we can reduce since we have a beaver sitting around. In fact, we have a couple of beavers sitting around. So we can pause this one entirely. We have this farmhouse that handles this area, and then this one helps a little bit. They can pick some of the crops up here and then also help out with the kohlrabi down here. They finished constructing the first smelter. Looks like they're working on getting this engine constructed. We can bump this up on the priority list since I think they should be able to finish this one first. We'll make that one super high prioritized. And they are starting to put some more metal blocks in here because the smelter over in this area is up and running once again. Looks like we are at 18 unoccupied beds once again. Our well-being is down to 9 instead of 10, which is not good news. We don't want it to go down. We want it to be going up. I did see one of you guys commented a few episodes ago about mangrove fruits. I have not had a chance to utilize those yet. But I think this is a perfect time to get those established, since we have a couple foresters over here, and we have a gatherer flag right in this area. I don't think there should be any bad water coming into this part of the water. I will need to manually close this floodgate, at least for now, when a bad tide comes through. But the goal is to replace all of these here with sluices, and then they will automatically close when bad water starts to come through here. Although I guess the downside is that we don't really have anything that would flush the bad water through. We might need to make sure that we have the sluices, where are we? We might need to have the sluices all the way upstream and then close preemptively before the bad water starts going into this area. So that is something that I'll need to consider. But back to over here, we can make it so that they can plant the mangroves in this area. And then I haven't actually used mangroves a whole lot. It looks like here it says that they can be eaten raw, so we don't need to worry about processing them, which is excellent. That should help the beaver's well-being out. It'll only give them one well-being boost, but one's better than none. Looks like the more complicated foods give them a bigger well-being boost. Oh my gosh, we actually have no fun things set up for the beavers. We need to change that right now. We have plenty of planks and wood so we can unlock the scratcher. Once we know that this whole bad water diversion system works, also we did complete it, so that is good news. We can set these to the auto, and then make sure it's set to close above contamination. Looks like it was being a little bit funky. I think that when I switched it to auto, we still had this box checked. But we can be pretty picky. I think that having it set to 2% will be sufficient. And then during the first bad tide, we'll get to witness how this whole thing works. And then if it does, we actually can get rid of all of these contamination barriers along here, which would be kind of funny if that ended up happening. As you can see, we have a couple smelters that are up and running now. We have the two-boy station that's constructed. And so we're just waiting on metal blocks for this engine to be up and running. And then we are starting to drop in scrap metal. So let's turn back on this second scavenger flag, since I think we're going to be needing a lot of scrap metal coming up here shortly. It looks like we have some beavers sitting around. So another project that we can start up is getting some bad water collected. We'll need to have some metal blocks to get the deep bad water pump established, but they can get some other parts of it set up since it requires gears and logs, and it looks like we have a good amount of both of those. And we can also get a storage set up for the bad water. We can also unlock the large water tank since we have plenty of science, and then place it down, but they won't work on this obviously since there's metal blocks that they need to put in. But once again, they can put some of the other resources like planks and gears, and we were actually maxed out on planks just a moment ago, and then the gears, it looks like we're doing pretty good still. We are dropping a little bit, but we are building quite a few things that require gears. If we start dropping even more, then we can think about getting another gear workshop set up, since having excess gears is not a bad thing. And then we're getting pretty close to finishing this engine, 5 metal blocks away. Overall in food we're doing okay, we're still hovering around 800, 850. We are 6 days into the drought and we are actually doing pretty good on water. We've increased our water by about 900 or so, and so we're probably going to be maxed out pretty darn quickly, which means that it's worth thinking about getting the hydroponic garden constructed. It once again requires metal blocks, but we have the other resources that we can put into it. I think that it would make sense to get some of them established underneath these large water tanks, and they have put a bunch of resources into these so far. But since they have not finished constructing it, if we delete this, then you can see we will recover all of the resources that we put into it. And the hydroponic garden is pretty cheap to unlock, only 200 science. And so we can get a couple of those placed down, set them to mushrooms, since it only requires the mushrooms to be fermented, versus the algae, you need to use the food processor. Looks like we're actually pretty much maxed out on wood at the moment. And so we have some beavers who are sitting around. Probably should get some more wood storage set up. This area over here is actually a good candidate for getting some pretty easy wood storages set up. And with us having so many vacant jobs at the moment, we do need to be aware of where those vacant jobs are. And then looking in the workplaces column, it makes it a lot easier to manage it. In fact, we actually have no workers in the hauling post. That is no good. Let's start focusing on some of these lumberjack flags and lowering the priority for these, since we clearly are maxed out on wood at the moment. In fact, I'm going to bump this up to regular priority, and then we'll have some of the builders' huts set to lower priority. We always want to have this district center working, so we'll keep this one bumped up. I actually have both of these ones paused at the moment, which means right now we only have 4 workers, which are high priority, and then these ones are slightly lower. So down the road, once we get our beaver population up a little bit, then we can get some of these builders' huts set to regular and high priority. But for now, we don't have any essential infrastructure that we're working on. Looks like they actually did finish creating this engine over here, and that's just another reason we need to have some haulers. It is now selected to be prioritized by haulers, which means we should start having some metal blocks get pumped out, and that's going to help give us enough resources to construct all of the buildings over here. But clearly we are not going up in beavers. I'm trying to get the well-being up just a little bit, but there's not a whole lot of space, as you guys can see. So I'm going to place down a couple of these breeding pods, make sure we high prioritize them, and then once we get some metal blocks stored up, I do want to replace this power wheel over here since it requires a couple beavers, and this is not a job that we want to have beavers in right now. The food is starting to drop just a little bit, but we do have these hydroponic gardens working. It takes a while for the mushrooms to mature, 192 hours, so we have a little bit of a ways before those are ready. We will need to get another fermenter set up. We will have some space up here that we can do that, or we can replace some of the buildings down here like I mentioned before. And it looks like we're doing pretty good on water. We are almost done getting the metal blocks set into this large water tank, and then that's going to add 1200 capacity to our water storage. Right now it's 2400, so that's a 50% increase. Once they get this one constructed, that's another 1200. I just unpaused this farmhouse, and we have 2 workers in here once again, since as you can see we have a lot of cassavas that are ready to be harvested, and we're basically out of the raw cassavas at the moment. And it looks like we have some bad water now. The bad water pump got constructed. This guy is doing his best. In fact, we've almost filled this tank halfway up so far. And then once that one's filled, we can pause this guy. Since we're actually not using bad water at the moment, we will want to get the explosives factory unlocked soon. And I think this would actually be the perfect spot. I think that 3 smelters will be sufficient for a while. And since we didn't finish constructing this, all of these resources will go back to us. And we have our first large water tank set up. Unfortunately, we have not constructed the platforms to get over here, so we can prioritize those ones first, since we're actually maxed out on water right now. And you can see we have a lot of water pumpers sitting around. That's a no-no. So for now we can pause a few of these guys and have them hop into some of the other jobs around the colony. And in the last episode I asked you guys to help name the district, and I saw lots of great submissions from you guys. This was probably the most names that I've seen in a while for a district. And the one that I liked the most was the Lowlands. So thank you to the user who commented that. So we now have the Lowlands district. And right now this colony is doing fantastic. I think our biggest struggle right now is food. And it's actually dropping a bit now, since we are increasing in the beaver population. So that is something that I need to keep an eye on. We have the mushrooms are only about 35 to 40% through. So it's not good that we're dropping right now. I think it's worth going over here and then setting up a farm. Maybe we'll just have some kohlrabi and cassavas, since those are pretty low stakes, and if the bad water ends up coming through here, which I don't think that it will now, since we have the sluices set up and the entire bad water diversion system is now ready. Theoretically this place should stay green, although it could happen that the bad water effects spill down and into this area. But either way, we do need to get some more food established. Kohlrabi is very quick, it only takes 3 days and then it produces 2. So let's start replacing some of these berries with kohlrabi. And just as I decide we want to place some food over here, we have a bad tide incoming, 3 days. So this is going to be the ultimate test for our colony. Looks like we are dropping in berries a little bit. Before we get rid of all of these, we'll add a second gatherer flag over here and have this guy pick some of the berries that are remaining. I suspect that a lot of the kohlrabi over here is going to end up dying since it's so close to where the bad water will be. These ones over here might survive, but like I said, the kohlrabi is pretty low stakes. And then once we've planted all the kohlrabi over here, we can actually pause this farmhouse, since it'll really just be sitting around waiting for a few days. Plus the food might end up dying before then. And we have both of the large water tanks that are up and running. As you can see, they are fully connected in, so our water storage has increased quite a bit. We're up to 4,800 in total. We're only hovering around 2,400 water since I had 3 of these water pumpers paused. But now they are unpaused and we have a couple more that got established. So that'll help us get our water levels up. But we also won't need to worry about that too much since the first bad tide is typically only a day long. We have 22 metal blocks right now. I think that's enough to get an engine constructed. And then we have plenty of gears and wood as well. So let's replace this large power wheel. We're going to have to make sure we quickly get it replaced and super high prioritize this, since that is a power system for our fermenter and one of our gear workshops as well. But that does free up 2 more jobs, which will be very helpful since we're running a little bit short on beavers at the moment. Considering our berry numbers were dropping a bit and we actually weren't maxed out, I am a little concerned that we have not quite enough berries planted over here, which means we'll need to replace some of these trees with berries. So we'll mark all of these to be removed, or at least not to be replaced. And then as the trees grow up and they cut them down, we can start planting some more berries. Hopefully all the berries over here don't end up dying during the bad tide, but we will find out in the next episode what that bad tide brings. I'm hoping that we'll be okay since we have the bad water diversion system up and running now. And we do have a good failsafe with the irrigation barriers all along the stream. We finished making our larger water tanks, which is fantastic. It'll help us during the upcoming droughts that start to last longer, and also give us a little bit of a buffer with some of these mushrooms over here. And then maybe most importantly, we have a couple more smelters that are up and running, and those are powered by this engine right here. So we're not dependent on bad water flowing through in order to power the smelter like this one is over here. Be sure to leave a comment on what you think will happen during this bad tide. Do you think this bad water diversion system will work? Is it properly configured? Is the geometry good? Or will we be dependent on this backup system? If you enjoyed today's video, go ahead and hit that like button. I really do appreciate it. And with that, we will see you in the next episode. Thanks for watching.